Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y todos. Bienvenidas a este conversatorio de formación política y práctica de las lenguas. Les cuento un poquito la historia de esta iniciativa. Aquí estamos la profesora Janeth Ortiz y yo, dos de las 6 personas de la Escuela de Idiomas, entre ellas pues Ana María Sierra, éramos 6 o 5, bueno, ya se me olvidó, 5. 5. Y Elena Ramírez y Alejandro Santamaría, estudiante de traducción, Alejandro, y Elena, estudiante de licenciatura, quienes liderábamos desde el año pasado este ciclo de conversatorios, sobre todo en el marco del paro nacional. Tuvimos la idea de formarnos políticamente y de practicar las lenguas locales y extranjeras. En esta ocasión tenemos el tema que nos va a presentar la profesora Janeth Ortiz. El título es Foreign Language Educators Working Towards Peacebuilding. Y voy a permitirme leer una presentación de la profesora en inglés. Janeth Maria Ortiz is a professor, researcher, and teacher educator at the undergraduate and graduate level at the School of Languages, Universidad de Antioquia, Colombia. Her research interests include critical literacies, critical interculturality, and critical peace education in relation to foreign language teaching on learning and teacher education. During the last 6 years, her research projects have focused on the exploration of critical decolonial approaches in professional development initiatives and in English teaching courses, intending to contribute to the permanence of all students at the university, especially of those coming from ethnic communities. La idea en este conversatorio es que la profesora haga una introducción y luego todos participemos con preguntas, comentarios, o incluso ella nos hará algunas preguntas, o yo como moderadora, yo daré la palabra, lanzaré algunas preguntas. Podemos expresarnos en inglés, en español, en francés, en la lengua que quieran. Bueno, tampoco porque no hablamos todas las lenguas, pero pues algunas las entendemos y no las hablamos. Pero bueno, bienvenidos y bienvenidas, profe Janeth, adelante.
Bueno, muchas gracias Doris por la invitación y a todos los asistentes hoy por estar aquí en este espacio. Bueno, como Doris lo dijo, en la dinámica entonces es que yo voy a hacer una introducción y pensando en que no solamente hay profesores, de eso pueden activar las cámaras si quieren, que nos hace más agradable la conversación. Y como estamos no solamente pues, profesores de lengua, ¿cierto? Sino pues, estas invitaciones abiertas a la comunidad universitaria, entonces yo voy a hacer una introducción como a unos conceptos básicos y un acercamiento a lo que es el campo de la educación para la paz, y ya luego vamos entonces a conversar a partir de esos conceptos y principios de la educación para la paz. Ese es como el plan. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Can you still see it? Because I just put it in presentation mode. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, foreign language educators working towards peace building. I'm going to start with some questions for you. Like how much, not how much we know, but how familiar or what we think about, what are our own understandings of these 3 concepts. How would you define peace? How would you define violence? And how do you define, or what do you think peace education refers to? Who would like to tell us some of his or her ideas? In any language you want to participate. Anyone?
Hasta ahora nadie ha levantado la mano.
What do you think, for example, peace? What's peace for you?
Antonio Jaramillo.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, my camera is off. There you go. Hi, everybody. I'm Antonio. I'm an ophthalmologist from the University of Antioquia. I currently live in London, but at the moment I'm in Russia.
Oh dear.
Soon to leave. Peace. We're trying to think about that. So I will describe it as a sensation of tranquility. Being able to do what I want to do without being worried of something bad happening to me. And that would bring me to violence, anything bad that I wouldn't allow the other person to do towards me, I guess. And thinking about peace education, I don't know, I was thinking like education per se, it's probably educating for peace. If you give the elements of, if you educate someone, it probably would make that person less violent. That's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, Antonio. Are you going to travel somewhere else?
I'm going to London, back to London on Sunday, yes.
Back to London, okay. And how are things going on in Russia right now?
Well, life carries on normally here at the moment, except for us, the foreigners, that we cannot use our cards. But Russians are pretty much the same. Everything is open. The sanctions are not yet hitting the people yet. Because for markets, restaurants, everything is quite normal.
Okay, thank you, Antonio, for being with us and sharing some of your ideas. I guess later when we have when we open our conversation, we can ask you more things because you know what is going on right now with the war in Ukraine, and that is absolutely of our interest today and of our concern, of course. Now, like that, we're talking about peace and what education should do in the for the construction of peace. Okay, thank you very much. I guess Juan was going to say something, Juan Carlos.
Yes, I was thinking about peace related to what Antonio just said, in terms of having the possibility of being yourself, living in a state of respect, in a state of your own, you know, making your own decisions, not being judged by others because of who you are. Because, you know, one could tend to think that peace is a state of harmony where everything is quiet and nice. And I don't think that's peace. It's more related to that possibility of having the possibility of being. So that's why I connected to what Antonio just shared. And continuing with that, let's say definition of violence, I think it is something that will go against all those possibilities that you may have in peace. Not being respected, being abused, being, you know, having your rights violated, and all that. Well, in violence can manifest itself in so many ways that that we just need to be alert with our eyes open, because it can be subtle, it can be, you know, visible, it can be tangible. Well, there are so many ways. And peace education, well, imagine if we understand what peace is and what violence is and means, then peace education is the possibility of thinking of ways to generate spaces for everybody. That's hard, but I think it's the key point. Again, all teachers, all professionals, everybody can be part of peace making, peace building in in the most simple acts, in the simplest way. So that's my contribution to start the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. And it is very interesting how you and Antonio, what you highlighted as well, make that connection to between peace and your inner self, because you see it as something that has to come from every single individual and that is connected to ourselves. Okay, thank you very much, Juan. Who else would like to say something about your own perceptions, your own understandings of peace, violence, and what you think peace education refers to?
You can also participate in Spanish.
En français.
En français aussi, mais je ne sais pas s'il y a quelqu'un qui parle français. Et... Mais moi, je ne peux pas participer parce que je suis modératrice.
Okay, and you can also write ideas in the chat if you prefer so.
Jamie Marcela escribió que está escuchando, pero que no puede participar activamente. Okay. Entonces muchos escuchan y están ahí atentos.
Okay, so if you cannot use the mic, you can write your ideas in the chat. Okay, and my second question to you all is, why are you interested in peace education? And Juan mentioned like something related to that already, like how he thinks that teachers and also Antonio mentioned like the role of education should be helping us construct or build peace, right? And teachers and students have a role in constructing or in building peace, as Juan just mentioned. Any other ideas why education calls your attention?
Silencio. Janeth, yo quería decir de pronto para motivar también la conversación también en español, porque es posible y seguro vamos encontrando las conexiones, es que estar en este mundo es muy complejo y este mundo está muy, pues como muy atravesado por muchas injusticias, muchas desigualdades, muchas situaciones, aun cuando estás en un punto de privilegio, en algún momento te das cuenta, te puedes hacer el bobo. O te puedes hacer el bobo, o puedes ver la desigualdad y asumir un asunto como, no, es que eso no es para mí. Entonces creo yo que la paz nos interesa a todos, porque es que si queremos pues al menos tener una esperanza de seguir, pues como especie, tenemos que asumir una posición. Es que como vamos mal y vamos todos para la misma catástrofe. Entonces creo yo que sin ponerle pues el tinte, aunque en estos días el tinte es oscuro, gris, nublado en muchos sentidos, pues las conversaciones en los almuerzos terminan alrededor de ¿Será que mañana irá a pasar algo? ¿Será que el mundo se va a acabar? Y la pregunta es, ¿y para dónde cogemos si el mundo se acaba? Son preguntas que uno ni siquiera puede resolver. Entonces me parece importante que cuando uno se ubique en el mundo y mira a su alrededor cercano, a unos metros más allá, si mira un poquito más allá de su ciudad, de su país, usted se encuentra que el mundo sigue siendo una cosa de locos. Y depende de la actitud que todos asumamos, porque yo me puedo asumir un asunto de vivir como go with the flow, pues como, como pueda. Dios me lleve, Dios me traiga, como se dice coloquialmente. Eso lo tiene que traducir usted pues, o sea, para allá y para acá sin ningún tipo de referencia, pero yo creo que los que tratamos como de pensar que hay alguna posibilidad, tenemos que parar y mirar. Ese que para y mira, algo tiene que conectar con la paz. Y por eso digo que la paz no es un estado de tranquilidad, de quietud, de silencio, porque aún en los espacios más silenciosos pueden estar ocurriendo cosas muy horribles.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan, por esa reflexión. I would like to wait a little bit and see if somebody else wants to share their opinions about why we should care about peace education or about these issues around violence. If you have any other ideas to add. In Spanish again, or in English, or in any other language you want to use. Okay.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
Sebastián.
Go ahead, please. Sebastián.
Yeah.
Sebastián was going to talk.
And Jamie as well. Okay, Sebastián, go ahead. And then Jamie.
Okay, well, I think something that it's really important about peace education would be the importance about talk each other, because we usually, well, we used to avoid the talks or the small talks about politics, religion, or that kind of topics that we are not agree at all. But I think it's important that we need to talk about it, even if we are not, even if we don't have the same ideas. And that's the purpose of, I think that will be a purpose of a peace education, that we can share our ideas. And that doesn't mean that we are going to fight or to taking personal. It's just like I'm sharing my point of view, and you are also sharing yours, and it's okay. It's like we are different, so we can have different point of views. And also, well, like taking into account that the rights that we have, and also the rights that we have, and that would be like the limit, even if you have your specific point of view.
Thank you very much, Sebastián. Yeah, so it's about learning to relate to others in a positive way, and of course, starting from the fact that we are all different, that diversity is what it's natural, and not that we have, as like in many instances of our, and in many spaces of our society, we tend to assume that everyone needs to be the same and to agree and to think in the same way. So it's totally the opposite, because we live in a world where everyone is different, and that should be valued as something positive. Okay, thank you very much, Sebastián. What about Jamie?
Hello, Janeth, and hello, everyone. I'm sorry so
Hello.
much for not activating my camera right now, but I'm running some errands and I just realized about this meeting because of a friend. So that's why I just wanted to join and listen to this interesting conversation. And well, something that really calls my attention, and it's because right now I'm working in a high school in a private setting. And as a foreign language teacher, for me, it's really worrying right now that based on the situation that we're living and all the violence that we have experienced, and all the anxiety because of this virus, and I mean, all these worrying situations that we're just living right now. I think that as teachers, we have like a call rather than just teaching the content that we're just teaching right now. And to me, it's really worrying to see that like we need to go like as teachers, like we're not talking about these issues for example, in the place where I'm working right now. Like we're not talking about this, and we're just surviving. Like we're in survival mode right now. I'm just trying to teach my kids that like what we're learning, like the content, or like I'm trying to teach something else, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to teach teamwork. Like the grades are not important. Like what it's really important right now is just to listen to each other, to care about us, to like just our mental health. And I don't know, I'm just concerned. I'm just concerned that my kids, they're just struggling, and they're still just worrying about their grades. And when it comes to working teams, they don't know how to work in teams. They don't know what to be a good team or to be a teammate is. They don't know how to cooperate because they're just worried about a competition. They're just worried about getting good grades. If they're getting a 90, they're worried about that. So to me, is like we need to think about education in a different way, because I think we're failing. So that's my biggest concern right now, and I'm just very grateful for this space.
Thank you very much, Marcela, for sharing your thoughts and your feelings as well. Because that is true. I mean, I think that is something that we all as educators, or all educators, should be concerned about, like what is going on around us and how we can make connections between what's going on in the classroom and what we teach in the classroom and what is happening around the classroom that is affecting our students and ourselves. And those are usually not the topics we deal with, especially when we talk about foreign language teaching. Those are not the topics that we give relevance to in the classroom. So thank you very much for sharing also those ideas. So I'm going to begin with I think this first part about why we should care about building peace and peace education. Well, you know, there are some ideas here by Gomez that are similar to things you mentioned, and it is about the world we're living in. I mean, we're living in a world of huge inequalities, of suffering, of people, millions of people in poverty, lots of hunger, discrimination, exclusion, and as some of you mentioned, like we need to take a stance, right? So this is about taking a stance against all kinds of violence, as we're going to see in a few minutes when we explore what violence is about within peace education. So it is about taking a position against violence. And what does it mean? Well, Gomez says it here, like in a very straight manner. Posicionarse contra la violencia es denunciar y crear mecanismos que demuestren cómo se institucionalizan las acciones destinadas a perpetuar la inequidad y la injusticia estructural. La tarea se debe asumir, la tarea que deben asumir como propia tanto la educación como la escuela pública se resume en develar las violencias y llevar a cabo acciones concretas para erradicarlas. So that is a huge mission that education it's supposed to undertake. But we know because of these neoliberal ideologies in education and the marketization of education, we end up being more concerned about complying with standards, preparing students for competition, international competition, getting scores, getting good grades. So we end up like being concerned about those little things that are not teaching our students, as Subiria suggests it, to live together, right? To be critical thinkers and to communicate and to relate to others positively, which should be our concern. So that is like the starting point of peace education. And in our context, well, nowadays in the global context with all of the conflicts and wars and lots of issues and problems that we have worldwide, this becomes more relevant. And in our country, we know that even though like it's been 5 years since the peace agreement with FARC was signed, things are not getting any better. Things are still going in the wrong direction. We have lots of assassinations of social leaders every day. We have more people who cannot eat even like 2 meals a day in our country, and lots of things that we have to take into the conversation and also take a stance towards those issues. So and apart from the fact that we've gone through decades of armed conflict, we are, as you mentioned as well at the beginning, and we face on a daily basis very different forms of violence, multiple forms of violence against women, against children, against workers, indigenous peoples. So we have all of this going around, and as university members, students, teachers, employees, we should do something. So that this is precisely what this conversation is about today. Like some ideas and general concepts, but then thinking about what we can do and how we can go about this. I would like to also make a connection between this education and our role as foreign language teachers, in those who teach languages, but also those who are learning languages as learners of languages and especially foreign languages. So in critical, there is a specific approach or a change of an approach to peace education that is called critical peace education. That states that positive peace, we're going to see that in a minute, can only be achieved if the causes of violence are solved. If we tackle the causes of violence. And as you may know, the causes of violence, the cause of violence is inequality, right? Inequality, exclusion, domination, oppression at different levels. So that is like one starting point. We cannot talk about peace, or we cannot achieve peace if we don't work for inequality, for putting an end to inequality in its different forms. And also, so at starting point, it's that education, it's not separate from the social, historical, and economic conditions of our society. Education, it's actually a social, a political, and an ideological activity. And as such, it has, of course, it can perpetuate, and as it has been used in our education system in Colombia, in most cases, education ends up perpetuating inequality and increasing inequality instead of allowing for social mobility and for the improvement of social conditions for the majority of the population. But it can be used to transform those unequal social structures. That's the ideal role of education, improving the conditions, the living conditions for human beings. So we need, as language educators, this is something that we need to pay attention to, and that you have mentioned as well, how like we should care for what is going on with our students in schools, in our school communities, and in the world, right? So we need to see that language, it's not just, you know, a means of communication, a means to get a promotion. And if we talk about it, the ideologies behind the language, like English, for sure you have heard about English as being the universal language, the language of success, that we need to learn to be internationally competitive, but we need to revise those as language learners. And as teachers of a language, we need to revise those ideologies behind certain languages and understand that languages also produce social realities. They are not just means, neutral means for communication. They produce and reproduce inequalities, and they can actually become means for violence. Also, if we see that, we can see that language teaching is also a political activity, and that language teaching can be used to raise awareness about those unfair power relations that language learners and teachers make part of, and that they also reproduce. And that language also helps in the reproduction of those unequal relations of power. And also that education and language learning and language teaching activities are intertwined in socio-political and historical contexts. So those are some starting points that I want to highlight for all of us who are learning languages, teach languages, or just love languages, like reflecting on like what is behind those things we do with the language. How do we use language also to exert power over others? I'm going to tell you a little bit about peace education as a field, but I'm going to focus more on critical peace education because of the starting points that I just mentioned. So peace education started as a movement in education after the First and Second World War, when countries were concerned about, and educators about what they could do, what education could do to prevent future wars. After World War I and after World War II, that was the question, like how can education educate citizens who think differently and who can solve conflicts peacefully, right? So the end or the main goal of peace education is the elimination of all forms of violence. And in order to do that, peace education works on the transformation of educational praxis in different contexts in order to educate learners who see the world in a different way and who can face conflicts and solve conflicts in constructive and positive ways. So it aims for the construction of peaceful, just social structures where human rights are respected, but also we're going to see in a minute, not only human rights, also when we have respect for all forms of living beings that we share, with which we share our planet. So critical peace education, precisely in the last 2 decades, has claimed for peace education to focus on the analysis of those unequal relations of power that are problematic and, of course, that cause violence. So critical peace education is that political approach to peace education that strives for social change and that states that social change can take place within schools and outside schools, so that there needs to be a very close connection between schools and the social realities, the social historical contexts where schools are located and where educational processes take place. And that we need to transform those structures of violence and create new structures that work towards the construction of peace, or that strive for the construction of peace. We can see here on the right, we have some of the main principles of critical peace education. There is a focus on those asymmetrical power relations and the roots of those unequal power relations. Because again, critical peace educators assume that if we do not solve the causes of inequalities, of course, violence will continue to affect people and communities. There is also a strong emphasis on the fact that realities and those power relations are situated and are constructed in specific contexts. So there are views of violence and dynamics of violence and forms to build peace that work and that need to be constructed locally with the people who inhabit a specific area or context. So critical peace educators stay away from those universal and rather Eurocentric views of what violence should be understood, the way violence should be understood, and the way peace should be built. And they focus more on how we can construct local understandings of how violence works in that specific context, and how people can together construct different forms of peace. And of course, that needs a local analysis of those unequal structures and how they work. So that those are some of the principles of education. Some very important concepts you have mentioned that we face and we experience on a daily basis different forms of violence. We have Galton proposed in 1969 the triangle of violence, and this is a very important starting point for peace education. And we have direct violence that is visible, and that is the kind of violence that we all identify easily, because there is an agent, or there is an identifiable perpetrator of violence, right? And there are some violent acts that we can see or measure, or that are tangible, as Juan Carlos said at the beginning, like physical assault, a bomb, crimes. We see and identify those forms of direct violence on a daily basis. They are visible. But behind or underneath direct violence, there is structural violence that is that works that is underlined, that is not that easy to identify, and that is built into the system, and that is manifested in inequalities, unequal distribution of resources, not having the same type of opportunities. You also talked about that at the beginning when I asked you about your ideas of about peace. Like peace is being the possibility to do what I want to do, right? And that is exactly what structural violence puts at risk. We cannot do, or not everyone can do what they want to do with their lives. Not all of us have the same type of opportunities in life. So that is structural violence, and it's built into the system, and it works systematically and silently, and keeping those inequalities and those that unequal distribution of resources and opportunities. And cultural violence also operates in a hidden manner, justifying structural violence, and it is about all those symbolic aspects of life, hidden ideologies, myths that we take for granted, that we naturalize, and that justify different forms of violence, that justify and fuel structural violence and justify direct violence, right? And we see, for example, gender violence as coming from ideologies about the rights and not the rights, the characteristics of men, or gender roles that we attribute to men and to women. So what is naturally accepted for a man as a normal behavior for men, having many women and so on, being a womanizer, that is fine, but if it's a woman, then that is not right. And women, there are labels assigned to women if they behave in this in certain way. So gender violence has to do a lot, for example, with cultural violence, with a series of ideologies that we take for granted and that we naturalize, and that become like implicit rules of behavior, right? And that we take for granted, and we do not question on a daily basis. So we have these types of violence. We also have linguistic violence, could be a type of cultural violence. We also have violence against the environment that could be seen as direct violence, could be understood as direct forms of violence against ecosystems and communities as part of those ecosystems. So this is an important part of those concepts. And on the other hand, we have also the concept of peace that has developed differently, and we have come from understanding peace as negative peace to transformative peace. I'm gonna go over like 4 developments of peace. For example, we have negative peace, understood as the absence of direct violence, right? And the absence of chaos. And it's what we see, this form of peace is what we see in government discourses, right? Like peace is like when we do not have guerrilla groups attacking the population or paramilitary groups. So we will achieve peace with supposedly a peace agreement or a disarmament process from military groups, right? But that type of peace does not entail the analysis of the causes of violence, right? Which positive peace does. Positive peace, it's the absence of violence, but because there is social justice, because the causes of violence have been solved the inequalities, the structural, inequalities that we are faced with on a daily basis are solved, then there is no reason for violence. But the criticism to this view of peace is that, and you mentioned it as well at the beginning, I think it was Juan Carlos, like when are we going to live in a perfect world? Right? That's not going to happen. That looks like utopic, right? So after this realization comes the concept of imperfect peace. It is about a peaceful practices and the non-violent regulation of conflicts, attending to the needs of people and around specific values. That is a broader idea of peace, or like, let's say, more encompassing, but that has to do with a peace that is always under construction. It's not an achieved state. And in that same direction, Ramos Muslera proposes the idea of transformative peace as communities, a group of people constructing models of living together, right? Forms to live together in ways that can satisfy their needs, that help them build relations, positive relations to not only to satisfy their needs, but to care for each other and to respect one another and to live in harmony with nature and with living beings, and not only human beings, but with all living beings in our planet. This is a more encompassing idea of peace that not only entails peace among humans, but also peace with our natural environment and all the living organisms. So this is where we are heading for in the development of peace. And the idea is to think on how we can take this idea of peace and understand the different understandings, the different types of violence, to make connections to what we do in our classes as language teachers, or what we do when we learn languages with the languages and that we interact with, or that we are learning, and also with the people we interact with on a daily basis. So we see that critical peace educators take human agency as central, right? Like, we are, as human beings, we can transform those unequal structures, and we can build peace, which is imperfect, which will always be in the process of construction, but which will progressively provide better conditions, living conditions for communities and their surrounding environments. This is not one way. There is no one way to do things. There is no one way to build peace, and that's why critical peace education, it's nurtured and can be constructed through proposals from different critical theories, from critical pedagogy, from post-colonial theories, from decolonial theories, from race theories, human rights education. So there are many ways. There is no one way, and I think that is coherent with the principles of CPE. Something that, and this is the last part to finish and to start our conversation. Something central in critical peace education it's the understanding of as I said earlier, the local understanding of the dynamics of violence, but through different types of analysis. First, paying attention to local meanings, because there are different dynamic. Violence operates differently in different contexts and with different human groups. There is a need to analyze those structural issues. For example, those relations of domination that produce structural inequality in a specific context. So that is something that the analysis of power relations is central in critical peace education. There is a need also to deconstruct cultural violence, challenging those myths, those dominant ideologies, narratives that are taken as the right ones and the natural ones, but that spread visions of the world of dominant groups, and how to contest those narratives from listening or by listening to multiple voices, listening to counter narratives from those groups and individuals that are in subaltern positions or in let's say in marginalized or disenfranchised positions. And also doing a critical analysis of ecological violence, challenging those ideas of humans as being the owners of the planet, as being the ones that can control nature, exploit nature for their own benefit, and like that other living beings do not have the right, or we decide which other living beings have the right to exist and to continue living or not. And of course, finding ways to engage ourselves and students in social action. How can we, like from those local meanings and from those analysis of violence dynamics in our context, we can, and in our specific educational settings, we can attempt to construct different types of social action or forms of social actions with our students. Of course, going from what we can do in our surroundings, right? In our schools, at the level of the classroom, at the level of an institution, at the level of our neighborhood, of our community. So that's another aspect of very important aspect of critical peace education, I think, the understanding of violence and the deconstruction and analysis of those power relations. We have in Colombia as well, like different developments of peace education. For example, a trend in the analysis of multiple forms of violence. One of the things that people working on multiple forms of violence claim is that we need to stop associating peace or violence only to the fact or to the situations related to the armed conflict, and start thinking about violence and the construction of peace as something that involves us as individuals, as in the social groups that we interact, that we have a role in the perpetuation of different forms of violence, and of course in the construction of different forms of peace as well. We also have citizen education that has been like more present in the government initiatives, some guidelines by the Ministry of Education and how to develop skills and values in students to relate positively to other people and groups. So more like let's say there are different trends, like a conventional trend well, very aligned with the project of nation state, like what a good citizen should be like. So we need to provide that in education. But there are also other trends, critical trends in citizenship education, working on making diversity visible, opposing homogenization processes in education, and so on. So there are like different trends within this big umbrella term of citizenship education. And pedagogy of memory as another trend that has been worked on in Colombia, placing individuals who have suffered different forms of violence and their memories as fundamental for them to understand how they have come to be who they are and be at the state at the conditions where they are, and the role of memories as a possibility to reread the world and redefine or see themselves differently and develop that agency to change their living conditions. And those are like some of the developments in peace education that have been developed in Colombia, and there are many experiences in education that for which we would need another space, but I wanted to mention them because it is important, because Colombia is considered like a great laboratory of experiences in peace education and in language teaching, in foreign language teaching particularly, and in foreign language learning. We are not like very familiar with those types of work, and we could actually learn a lot from them on how we can also build peaceful spaces in our classrooms. So I'm gonna finish here. So we open the conversation. I have some references from the ones I used. I can share, I already shared this presentation with Doris. So if some of you want to have it, or if you also can see my email at the end. But I would like to open the conversation with these questions. I'm suggesting these questions, but I would also like you to ask other questions and have this as a back and forth conversation. Which concepts called your attention? What aspects of peace education do you identify with? Like are there things that resonate with your own principles, with your own teaching practices? Learning practices, things you do on a daily basis. How do you think you are involved as a language student or as a teacher, as a language educator in peace building processes? Do you think this relates to you or not? How can we as language learners and language teachers, or as university members, do something towards peace education, or towards constructing peace in our spaces from our role as teachers, learners, employees at the university? Is there something we can do from our positions and from our role? Those are some of my questions, and of course I'm open also to hear your questions and to start a conversation. I don't know, I'm gonna leave the questions there. So we have them, and then in a few minutes, I'll stop sharing the screen so we can see all the people participating. Doris, if you want to start to play the moderator, go ahead.
Yes, but there's nobody willing to talk, willing to speak.
We have
give some wait time. Yeah, you can raise your hand or activate your micro.
Write questions or comments in the chat as well.
Lisette, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For me, the topic are very interesting because the actual situation of the country is difficult. The children and the teenagers need attention in this topic because currently they are alone in many spaces, in the school, in the street. The parents work all day and the children watch TV and and see news, and they can all see violence. And in our case, is very interesting. Receive this topic for do any strategic for work in different situation. For me, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, and you're totally right. Like, we need to think of our students as teachers, to think of the issues that are affecting our students, and like observing the things they talk about every day, the things they mention, how they naturalize different types of violence, what they watch on TV, how they are exposed to violence all of the time, and they start like assuming that's the way things work. Like, they start like thinking that violence or using language, for example, against, in a violent way, against their classmates, or, you know, physical confrontations and all those things are part of life that they start seeing as natural. We need to start like opening spaces for conversation in the class about what we see in them, right? Like what we observe in their behavior, and make it one of the class topics, and the excuse, make them like an excuse for conversation. But of course that needs to be planned, right? But it all starts by observing and getting to know who your students are, what affects them, and we need to open spaces for that. Because if we just, you know, focus on covering topics, going through the syllabi and emphasizing on linguistic aspects, we're going to miss the chance to really talk about the things that affect them. And not only because they are aware that those things affect them, but how we read what's going on in our classrooms with students, right? Like, sometimes we have to push for those topics because they are not going to suggest, like, let's talk about violence. That's something that is not going to come up easily sometimes. I mean, when we're talking about children, when we're talking about teenagers, of course, at the university level, that would be a different story.
Today is normally the violence.
Exactly.
The many people teach to the children to fight with other person. Today is important for the children fight with other person. This is crazy for me.
It's all around them.
Yes, teacher, and the situation of the world, the pandemic, the people today are more violent. The people are defensive, and no, and can or they don't spaces to speak, to I don't know, to do other situation of the peace or the friendship. I don't know. It's very difficult.
It's a huge challenge, and especially because of what you mentioned, they are like violence is all around them. It's in their video games they play, the movies they watch, even cartoons are really violent. And after the pandemic, that is a huge issue. And I know if you haven't. I don't know if you've seen in the news these days, but there's a lot of fights in schools, and even they use social networks to invite everyone to see a fight on live, and they record it and upload it to social networks. It's really a crazy thing that it's all around, and that they are exposed to on a daily basis. So how can we take advantage of that to take it into the classroom and plan a unit on that, like on how we can look at those at media and at all of the things they are exposed to and that they are naturalizing. But of course that needs planning. That's not something that like we can have one conversation in class and that will be solved. It's not as easy as that. Thank you very much, Lisette.
Thank you.
Juan. I'm sorry, Doris is the one.
No, don't worry.
I'm sorry.
You can do it. You can also do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris and Janet. There are so many things to think about. I think your presentation is giving us a lot. So we need more presentations. We cannot just have only one, a series of presentations. So please, Doris, take note of that. We're going to do more presentations on this. No, I'm just thinking aloud, and the comment that I want to highlight is how peace building should be a slow movement, something slow. For me, it's very striking to hear that we when we had the peace agreements, we were just expecting everything to happen just one moment, and this is something that it's making me think a lot, because even in the small spaces where we live, where we are, our homes, our schools, our workplace, and all these places where we interact, we have conflict. And conflict is never resolved in one single moment. So I think it's important that we take it into account, that we realize that this implies not only the will of one or two people, but many people need to be participating in this process. Well, as I said before, there are many things, but I would like to focus on that. It's slow. It takes time. It takes people to participate. It takes, it's going to even bring more problems, but that's okay. The main point here is that we don't kill each other, because look what we're having in this moment. Every single day we're listening to we're listening to other people being killed, and nobody knows anything. This is like, and it's sometimes like, if there was an indigenous person killed in Cauca, so the people from Cauca or the relatives of that person are the ones to cry for that person. We don't even know. It's like, I'm working in a class right now with my students in an English 5 course, and at a moment we were talking about the killing of social leaders, and it was striking for us to hear one of our classmates telling us that the information about these social leaders is scarce, is difficult to find. It's like there's another killing and nobody knows anything and nobody cares, because we have to pay attention to what is happening, in the politics, in Netflix. I think people know more about Netflix than what is happening in the real Netflix, in their real lives. So I wanted to comment on that, because if we don't think of of peace building as a slow movement. Many things are coming back to slow. This is something that you hear everywhere. We are just rushing towards the end. Well, I don't know towards the end of what, but we're just going straight, you know, to whatever is awaiting for us at the end. But it's good to think about that. Slow. We have to go slow. We have to take the time. We have to talk. We have to slow down and make this a different movement. Thank you.
Juan, and thank you. And I wanted just to, emphasize on the fact that you say it is low, because it is low because it is complex. And it's not easy, as you said. This is going to bring even, you know, more trouble. There are topics that are very difficult to approach in the class because of what Sebastian mentioned earlier. Like we all have different views, and we all have come to understand reality in a different way, and then those tensions in class discussions will arise for sure, and that won't be easy to handle. And sometimes what we try to do is like avoiding those critical topics. So it is something that we need to learn to do little by little, and of course we're going to make mistakes, but it's also slow because we need to start by ourselves, like also examining our own views of different issues, our own views of violence, our own understandings, and that takes time, and that is not easy either, because we have to like question our own positions and be willing as well to take a stance and to take a political position that will be in many cases uncomfortable, and that will put us at risk in terms of, you know, if you're working for a religious school or if you're working for a very conservative school. I mean, there are many things that are at risk when you decide to take on like a project like this and say, I'm gonna work against all forms of violence, and that has to do with like you know, gender violence, violence against ethnic groups, violence against LGBTIQ+ community. Like it's everything. It's not just like it's very easy to be against violence coming from one side. Okay, who's not going to agree with you that war's bad, that, I don't know, kidnappings are terrible? Yeah, that maybe, well, it's not easy, but that is maybe not so much problematic in terms of the risks that it can bring for you. So that's why it also, it's a complex process that entails, like, it involves yourself in your own.
There's
Janeth,
Brandon who raised his hand.
Yes,
but before we get to Brandon, let me say just one thing, and it's connected to what Janeth is saying and to the previous contribution. You said that we need to revise, that we need to check our structures. And this is important because when we start observing the way children behave in our classes, right, we can also start thinking, what are the contexts where we are being raised? Why is it that we have to be violent? Who said that kids or male children have to be violent, right? And who said that the girls need to be in those are things that need to be questioned and you know, revised. And that's what I'm saying, is that is taking the time, is saying, I want to do this, I want to know more. Because when you are an educator, you may learn a lot about English and what you have to teach, but you have to learn so many things about humans, kids, behavior, social, you know, all these things. So it's an invitation to think about that. All right. Okay. Brandon, you can go on. Thank you.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes, Brandon, very well. Loud and clear.
Okay. Good afternoon. Okay. I only had one comment. And the presentation was great, and about the peace is important that we will in each family, but currently the social media had a great impact in everyone because you are saying a lot of violence. It is very important for not encourage more the violence with that content. But it's important for what happened in the war, but I think that information of photos and videos had a great impact in everyone. That's it.
Thank you, Brandon. I think what you said also relates to what Lisette said earlier about children being exposed to violence everywhere and in the media, right? On the media, that's one thing. Children and adults and everyone, like all of the information we get from the media and the messages we receive, explicit and implicit messages that structure the way we see the world, right? So one of the lines, let's say, of action that are necessary to take and that are related to peace education is it's how we can also work with our students on reading media critically, right? Identifying in a media text, a video, a piece of news, a written report, news report, for example, those hidden messages, those hidden intentions of the text, who is benefited by that text, who is put at disadvantage, like which other perspectives are not present in a specific text, whose perspective is missing. We need to work on that, working on critical media literacy to see, for example, how violence becomes a strategy for selling media, right? And for having children there consuming media and consuming video games all of the time. And so that is one trend. What you're mentioning, it's very important because we need to interact differently with social media, and I think that was made evident during the social unrest we had last year. You know, there is and right now that we are seeing this huge war between Russia and Ukraine, we know that there is the actual war there, the combats and the bombing and the missiles and everything, but there is also a media war going on. Right? This is a war of different worldviews in tension, right? And trying to and actually in one news report, I remember there was a government representative saying like this is not only a war there, an armed war, but it's not only about winning the war there on the land, but also about winning minds and hearts, like gaining people or getting people on your side, right? And that is done through media. So that is another huge axis that will help us work towards peace education. How can we educate students to read media critically? And that has to do with educating critical thinkers, right? And using language, and when we are interacting with language and with texts in different languages, how do we read those texts critically as well? So that I wanted to mention that in relation to what you said, Brandon, about like we need to be informed and we need to be exposed to what is going on here, what is going on in other places in the world, but we need to read those media critically.
I don't know if there's somebody else who wants to speak.
I don't understand very well the final. You can read again, please. Repeat.
What Janeth said or what I said? What Janeth said?
Yes.
Okay, Janeth, please.
The last part, Brandon, well, I was saying that another way that as educators and also as citizens, like another, let's call it strategy to work towards the construction of peace, because one of the critical points in peace building is being able to analyze inequalities at different levels, not only like economic inequalities, but inequalities among groups. For example, gender inequalities, right? Men and women, and oppression against women that has been historical, right? That is a way of oppression. So, for example, for students and teachers to be able to analyze, like, why is it that so many women are killed every day in Colombia, right? What should we start to analyze? What do people think about women? What should women behave like? What should men? What are their natural behaviors that we expect from men? And how did we come to believe that it is right that men treat women like this, or like to understand those things, those different forms of inequality? We need to develop some skills, let's say, right? And media has a lot to do with those things we think about the world, right? Like what we see in TV commercials, what we see in movies, what we see on the news. They are all the time sending messages about what women should be like, what men should be like. So working with, and as you mentioned, that we need to be exposed to information about what is going on in our context and in other parts of the world. I said that reading those all the information that we find in social media or in other type of mass media, we need to learn to read it critically. That means to understand what ideas or what ideas are spread through those texts, because those texts always send us different messages about women, about men, about the war, about powerful countries, about supposedly underdeveloped countries like Colombia. We are receiving lots of messages from the media, but we need to learn to understand those messages and to see, like, what are the implicit purposes of those messages, who benefit from those messages, who is affected negatively by those messages, right? We see that all the time. So one way, one line of work or one strategy we need to explore as language learners and as language teachers is how to read media. That is one possible direction that can contribute to peace education in the way that it enhances how we read the world, right? How we see the world. Antonio.
Hi again.
Hello.
This has been very interesting. In the first slide, I remember I said that educating is also educating for peace.
Mhm.
But after the whole presentation, I've just been thinking and remembering some people that I've met that are highly educated and kind of didn't do anything for them. If I may say, you're talking about media. Now that we have access to social media and internet, it's pretty easy to share everything. And I remember having this discussion on media platform. A friend of mine shared something about those terrible and horrible Venezuelans that are in Colombia, and they were, according to what he shared, a video. They were protesting about some kind of mercados that they received by the Colombian government. But if you took a closer look at the video and here, the accent was for Dominican Republic. So I just query him. These are people from Dominican Republic. These are not Venezuelans. And his immediate response was like, cannot they learn the accent? But if you look close, and if you do just something like a quick search on internet, I found the original video, and the bags where the mercados had the Dominican Republic flag. So I asked him why the Colombian government will give mercados the Dominican Republic flag. I think we should take this video out. And the next thing that he said is that I was just trying to censor him. So yes, so my point here is that given education, like any kind of education, doesn't bring peace. We need to think about peace education. I'm not an English teacher, but I do, I'm heavily involved in medical education. And this is something that's not of my scope, but you have me thinking about this. And this has been very interesting and very eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio, for sharing. And I think I mentioned earlier that we saw, like, we've seen the power of media manipulation in Colombia. I think, like, you know, during social unrest last year, there was a lot of, you know, action on social media for and against protesters, and, you know, primera línea and criminalization of youth participating in primera línea, and, you know, lots of controversy going on, but media, like people publishing lots of media texts, many of them fake media, you see, intending to spread like a certain view over the population. And also with the plebiscite in 2016, remember that the extreme right media campaign against the yes, and against approving the plebiscite for the peace agreement. In the end, they acknowledged that they had used you know, fake news, and that they had published false information in order to have people vote out of anger, you see, and finally we saw that was effective in the results of the plebiscite. So I do think we in Colombia have seen clearly the power of media manipulation, and that has to do a lot with violence, because we're all the time constructing a view of others, you know, constructing a view of the enemy. And that, of course, ends up in all kinds and forms of violence. So that is a strong line. But there are many other ways. You know, there are many other ways to work towards peace education, and as Juan Carlos said, well, we need more spaces to share experiences of not only, and I would say not only people working in foreign languages. We can have some people, some guests from people working in foreign languages talking about this, but also people from other from other areas at the university sharing their experiences. That would be very nice. Exactly, because another thing is that we do need interdisciplinary work. Antonio said, I'm not a language teacher. And we language teachers, we say, well, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a historian. And we need all that knowledge to be able, to take action and to better, to build better strategies, but with a common ground, with a common goal, which is like, how can we educate different citizens that are critical and that can relate differently to others and to our planet, and that can live differently, because certainly this is not the way we've done it is not working. And there can be like very cultivated people, but in the end, they are not critical, and they are not transforming their surroundings, right? They are perpetuating these different types of violence.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, profesora Janeth, por este espacio, por haber preparado estos elementos de discusión. Muchas gracias también a los asistentes, a las asistentes. Nos vamos con muchas preguntas, con muchas ideas también, con reflexiones iniciales, ¿cierto? Porque decíamos que esto tiene mucha tela por cortar. Y profe Juan Carlos Guerra, que es experto en hacer conclusiones muy inteligentes, entonces yo le voy a dar la palabra. Adelante.
Ya me comprometiste, Doris. No, muchas gracias por el espacio de nuevo. Como lo dice la profe Doris, la idea es que podamos seguir compartiendo y ampliando como estos encuentros donde hay muchas cosas por aprender. Solamente quería hacer una invitación también en relación con lo último que decía Janeth, y es la invitación a acercarse a un filósofo español que se llama Joan Carles Melich.
Lo puedes escribir ahorita en el chat, por favor.
Sí, ya lo voy a poner. Que nos habla de un asunto bien interesante que nos puede llevar hasta el Holocausto, pero es que el Holocausto no ha terminado. Él hace unas reflexiones donde dice que cómo es posible que una nación como Alemania, que tuvo el desarrollo cultural más grande, más increíble históricamente, terminó haciendo lo que hizo. Esas son unas reflexiones que uno de entrada dice, espere, ¿de qué me está hablando? ¿Qué me está contando? Y nos hace una invitación como maestros. Es que definitivamente lo que nosotros vivimos en nuestros países en relación con el conflicto, con la guerra, es muy, muy similar a lo que en algún momento pasó y lo que está pasando en otros espacios. Por eso lo traigo a colación, porque no es ni siquiera un asunto del pasado, es una cosa que está pasando en un conflicto que se está viviendo en este momento, en conflictos regionales donde se sigue matando a la gente como, sí, pues simplemente y seguimos. Entonces él nos hace una invitación a pensar que el asunto no es llegar a esas altas esferas de la cultura, a esas altas esferas de la economía, a esas altas esferas de, póngale el nombre que quiera, sino a la humanización. O sea, es simplemente entender que es que el otro es usted mismo reflejado. Eso es filosofía. Yo por eso lo dejo ahí, pero lo invito porque en algún momento tuvimos en un espacio similar una conversación con un profe de italiano en relación con este tema. Y la
profe,
pregunta,
justo estaba pensando en eso, era profe de ingeniería, sino que había estudiado en Italia y pues habló sobre la memoria, habló de Primo Levi, el escritor.
Exacto.
Entonces esto nos conecta a todos y nos concierne a todos, no es que porque somos profes y ya. No.
Exacto. Entonces, más como la invitación por ahí, claro, y con eso podemos cerrar. Es que el profe lo dijo, yo trabajo en el área de la salud, pero es que el asunto no es trabajar en el área, solamente en un área. Si yo tengo la posibilidad de compartir con otros, nosotros, por ejemplo, desde el trabajo con idiomas, tenemos una posibilidad inmensa, pero cuando tú lo asocias a otras condiciones, a otros contextos, a unas maneras de vivir. Todo esto es un conocimiento que van recogiendo los profesionales, pero que muchas veces no saben qué hacer con el conocimiento o simplemente lo registramos en diarios, en artículos y cosas y todas esas las guardamos o nos da puntos o cualquier cosa de esas. Entonces, por eso es importante pensar que es un asunto de todos y que es un asunto lento y que es un asunto de irse metiendo, de ir explorando, de participar en este tipo de espacios, inquietudes que te quedan, ¿sí? Para pensar, para explorar, para inquietarse con otros, porque creo que también es importante esto, inquietarse con otros. En una conversación que tuvimos con un grupo de indígenas la semana pasada, un profe hizo un comentario muy interesante y que me pareció muy bonito. Y él dice, ¿por qué la gente en este territorio, es decir, en este Valle de Aburrá, no se llama directamente como tú eres mi hermano, tú eres mi hermana? Porque aquí es, no voy a decir palabras para que no quede ninguna palabra grabada de las feas, pero porque aquí las palabras son, hey, vos, vos, y todo es despectivo. O sea, el mismo lenguaje está marcado de una violencia y eso nos parece tan normal que alguien que te llame pues, con una palabra que tenga que ver con una parte de tu cuerpo, pues, y uno como que, o que te nombre de una manera despectiva. Y eso, entonces él preguntaba, ¿eso es normal? Esa no es una manera de atacarnos. Bueno, ahí lo dejo. Invitación de nuevo para pensar cómo me relaciono con el otro, cómo construyo con el otro y cómo juntos aprendemos. De nuevo, mil gracias.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Y preguntaba Antonio si John Carlos Melich es catalán.
Sí, es
¿Qué es catalán?
catalán. Y se debe
Con
llamar
ese
Juan Carlos.
nombre,
Se debe
ahí
llamar Juan
mismo.
Carlos.
Joan, el Joan.
Sí, es catalán. Muy, muy interesante. Recomendado. Y de nuevo, filosofía para movimiento lento. Yo
Claro.
no soy filósofo, pero me encanta. Leo, me devuelvo al estilo vaca y rumiamos y rumiamos y rumiamos y me encuentro con alguien en un espacio como estos y escucho y me invitan y me dejan pensando. Colombia en este momento y por muchos años viene sufriendo una misma situación. Y él pregunta, ¿cómo es posible que la educación no haya cambiado nada después del holocausto? Estamos muy graves. Ahí de eso, ahí
Exacto.
lo dejo. Food
Seguimos
for
en lo
thought,
mismo.
¿ok?
Muchas gracias a todos y desde que el principio que dijimos de esta serie de conversatorios de educación para la paz, vamos a estarlos invitando a otros espacios similares, también vamos a estar hablando con la profe Ana de justicia social en la educación, que es también como por esta orientación, entonces los estaremos invitando a otros espacios porque sí hay muchos otros aspectos que abordar. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por acompañarnos hoy. Thank you very much.